Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad playing field. There are so many reasons why people get into that state. I'd say certainly, I totally recognizing that in myself and the people I've coached, that they set extraordinarily high standards for themselves that they're never going to reach. In terms of sort of commercial targets in a startup world, what is a commercial target, right? It's a number on a bit of paper which changes constantly, which is also a problem. But there are so many reasons. I think that there is also quite a large correlation between people who are on the autistic spectrum, for example, or people who already have mental health problems. That they find themselves in those positions and they can't math themselves out of it. They can't. I think important to say that a lot of these people, when they come up to a leadership technology, leadership role in technology, they have come up through being a very, very good engineer more often than not. Engineers are self-sufficient and they thrive on solving their own problems. But the kind of problems you have in technology are not the same problems you have when you're a leader of people or a commercial leader or a strategic leader. So, I think that kind of jump from being able to solve all your own problems, people expect to be able to take that and do it in a leadership role, which is not always the case, right? It's basically a career change.
I've interviewed quite a few CTOs recently, and there's 3 that I have recently done on different topics, but that same theme has come through, which is moving from being an engineer into a manager or a leader of some sort is not a promotion. It's a complete career switch. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And therefore you find yourself in this with a whole different set of priorities, procedures, demands, and people just are like fish out of water, and that must contribute to the stress and the burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. And also in the startup world, they're doing that usually without any real guardrails around what they're doing as a leader.
Yeah,
there's typically not a lot of process laid out, especially if you're the first CTO in a company. There's not a lot there to sort of direct you and say, this is what you should be doing, this is how you should be doing it.
Yeah, it's all on you to create that, right?
That's right.
What about when you get a healthy organization with a healthy leader who is, I guess, still at risk of burnout, right? Because I would imagine that most people are at risk of it if they don't manage themselves and their environment correctly. But when you see somebody who's getting it right, what do they display? How do they? Is there anything that they are doing particularly differently that just protects them from dropping into burnout?
I don't think anything can protect you from dropping into burnout, to be completely blunt. But I think the people I've seen who've been able to manage it and kind of slow down that inexorable sort of race to completely quitting or completely dropping out, I think most of them have shown a lot of vulnerability. So, they've been open both with their leaders, some people they report into, but also with people in their team that they're struggling, and they're quite open about it. And the benefit of that, obviously, is that there's a cascade effect where, the people in their team then see that it's okay to talk about struggling and making mistakes and so on. And, it means they're less likely to fall apart as well. I think the situations I see where CTOs have been most capable of pulling back from the brink have been ones where the leaders of the company are a bit more realistic about what their expectations should be, but also ones where they build a generative culture where there's like good psychological safety and it's blameless, in inverted commas. It's never completely blameless. But it means that the only pressure on the person themselves is coming from themselves. So it makes it that little bit easier to manage, because you've got to remember when you're burning out, it's not just dealing with internal kind of pressure and criticism. It's usually coming from stakeholders and leaders and VCs and so on at the same time. So, yeah.
So you mentioned vulnerability. I know we're going to cover this a little bit later on, but I think I'd love to ask you, if you're a CTO and you're in this position of responsibility with a lot of demand and expectation on you, and a lot hinges on what you do, and you recognize that you are burning out, and you go and you maybe talk to your CEO or someone and say, hey, look, I'm burning out. Does that feel like failure? Does that feel like admitting defeat?
It depends on the person. It did in my case. It did in my case because I assumed I would be able to fix it myself. Having been, I was only a year and a half away from coding stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I was used to being able to sort it out, as we said earlier, on my own. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to now go through your 4 stages of recognizing and handling burnout, both from a personal situation. So, you're the person, you're burning out, and people around you may be, and then from an organizational perspective. Mm-hmm. So your first stage is to recognize it early.